Shkolim, Perikei, Mishnah Aleph. Eilu hein hamamunin shehoyu b'mikdash. The following people mentioned in this Mishnah were appointed in the Beis HaMikdash. They were in charge of, they were the administrators of the items mentioned. Explains the Bartanura, there were 15 of these appointments, and the names of those people mentioned are not all at the same time period, but these were, as the Bartanura says, the Chasidim HaKesherim Shebechol Dor V'Dor, the greatest of those people who had those appointments of these particular jobs. And then the Bartanura also says the people who continued these jobs all retained their names, the names mentioned here, because these were the first people who did these particular jobs. Shamamunim horishonim shenismanu al kach, kachu yushmam. Lakach nikru haboim achrem al shamam. Even those people who continued the job subsequently retained these these names mentioned here. So what are these names? And let's see the particular jobs they fulfilled. Yochanan ben Pinchas al hachisomis. Yochanan ben Pinchas on the chisomis. These were tokens mentioned in later Mishnayos when various items were purchased. Achia al hanasochim. Achia was in charge of the nasochim, the libations. The Bartanura actually has a lashon al hasolosos on the flour. Again, this will be explained in a later Mishnah. Matisyo ben Shmuel al hapayosos. He was in charge of the lots that they took, the kohanim, the goyrolos, who would merit a particular avodah, and he was in charge of this particular job. Pesachio ala kinin. Pesachio was in charge of the kinin. We've seen this word before. This was a pair of birds, turtle, doves, pigeons that were bought for certain korbanos, certain chiyuvim. This was very complicated because there were a pair of birds. One was for chatos, one was an oila, and very complicated if they got mixed up. The coins were placed in what they call a box looking like a shofar, but if they got confused within the box, it became extremely complex, and therefore, as the Bartanura actually mentions, the person needed to be a chochem godel uboki. There's a mesechta kinim about these birds and what happens if they get mixed up, and this individual had to be absolutely an absolute expert in this field. Pesachia, that's mentioned here, Zeh Mordechai, says the Mishnah. This is Mordechai that we know from Megillas Esther. Loma nikra shemoy Pesachia. Why was his name Pesachia? The word Pesachia, we can see immediately the word Pesachinat, shoyu poiseach bidvorim v'doshon. He would open up matters and explain them. V'yodea shivim loshen, and he knew 70 languages. Explains the Gemara, not only did he know 70 languages, if people spoke and within their discussion they used words from different languages in one discussion, he would be able to understand exactly what they were talking about. Ben Achia al Choyle Me'ayim. Ben Achia was Mamune, he was appointed in charge of the Choyle Me'ayim, those people who had various stomach complaints. Explains the Bartanura that the kohanim were walking barefoot on the ground, and they were also eating a lot of meat from the korbanos, drinking water, not wine, water, and they may well have had trouble with their stomach, and he was an expert and knew exactly which herbs would be helpful for any complaints they would have. Next, Nechunya choife shichin. Nechunya was in charge of the digging, the various pits and ditches that were used to collect water for the people that would be coming for Oile Regalim. Gavini Kuruz. Gavini was the crier. Explains the Bartanura. He was machriz. Kuruz machriz. He would make announcements every morning in the Beis HaMikdash that the Kohanim should arise to their work. And his voice was that loud that it could be heard very far away. Explains the Bartanura. Koilo mi Yericho. Right up to Yericho, one could hear his voice. Ben Gever al Ne'ilas Sha'orim. He was in control of the closing of the gates and indeed the opening of the gates in the morning. Ben Bevai ala Pokia. Ben Bevai was in control of the Pokia. The Bartanur explains this was a whip which was used for the Mishmoros. There were places that the Kohanim stayed overnight, acting as Shomrim, and he was in control and in charge that if someone had fallen asleep, there was a whip available to arouse them and wake them up. The Bartanur also brings a Yerushalmi who says this word Pekia is a word that we find also in Mesechus Sukkah, where it's referring to the wicks of the menorah, and according to that Pirush, that's what he was in charge of. Ben Azor ala Tzlotzal. Ben Azor was Mamuna on the cymbals. What was that used for? Again, the Bartanur explains, when they heard the sound of the cymbals, the Leviim knew it was time to start singing. And Hugrus ben Levi al Hashir. Hugrus was in charge of the singing. It's Lahaschiles Hashir, starting the singing, and when it all should be finished at the same time, a choir master, the singing done at the time when they brought the Nesochin, the libation of wine, the singing was done with accompaniment of instruments, and Ben Garmu was in charge, Hurgrus Ben Levi was in charge of the actual singing, the choir master. Beis Garmu al Ma'aseh Lechem Aponim. That is the name of the family, the Beis Garmu, on the making of the showbread, the 12 showbreads. The shape was difficult, and also to ensure that it wouldn't break. And he was an expert, this family was an expert in this field. Beis Avtinas al Ma'aseh HaKetoris. This family was experts, Bekiim, in making the incense. They also were very familiar with the additional spice that was needed on Esev, called Male Oshon. They knew exactly what this was, and this ensured that the smoke from the incense went straight up. Elozar ala Paroiches. He was in charge of the Paroiches. These were the curtains. There were 13 different curtains, and he had to ensure whether it was time for new curtains. That was his responsibility. Or Pinchos ala Malbush. Pinchos was Mamuna. He was appointed on the Malbush, helping the Kohanim to put on their begodim and to take them off, and to be shomer their begodim, the big day kahuna, in the particular chambers for them.